Great. Thank you for the very warm introduction. And hi, everyone. I'm Zhijing Jin. Today, I'm very glad to introduce you the talk on Causal NLP, a path towards opening the black box of NLP. Great. So we start with the motivation. Nowadays, we see that large language models seem to be very impressive at many tasks. Such as this report saying GPT-4 take GRE with impressive performance in the 80th percentile, and then a bunch of other difficult exams for humans, such as the exams for law students, SAT, and the mentioned GRE tests. However, we also observe some surprising phenomena that large language models also fail unexpectedly in some simple scenarios. Here is an example that I extracted from Zhijing's TED Talk this year, titled Why AI is So Smart Yet Shockingly Stupid. So the example here is about I left 5 clothes to dry out in the sun. It took them 5 hours to dry completely. How long would it take to dry 30 clothes? And then at that time, the GPT-4 still answers it would take 30 hours to dry 30 clothes instead of 5 hours. Another example, which is more surprising, is if you ask them to count the letters. This is an example from McCoy 2023. And then in the first example, when the ground truth answer is 30, it answered it correctly. However, if you have an input which has 29 repetition of I, it still answers a more frequent number, 30, instead of the word 29. So it would be really surprising if users thought that they're on par with law students or professionals, but then they fail at unexpectedly stupid tasks like this. Some other cases to give us more intuition is this shift cipher, also from the same paper, where they say, like, if you make a cipher by shifting 13 positions in the alphabet, so mapping J to W, then the model is correct. But then if you ask it to shift 12 characters, then the model will make an error. So looking more into the training data as reported by that study, it finds a correlation between how correct the model is when the shift is 13 with the occurrences of 13 shifts in the C4 dataset, which some of the models are pre-trained on. So with all these intuitions, we really want to better interpret language models' successes and predict their failures. And to achieve this, we need a deeper understanding of how large language models work. In today's talk, we will go over an overall idea, like the general framework, how we understand LLMs working. And then we will introduce the role of Causal NLP in terms of 2 types of tests for large language models. First is behavioral test, and the second is intrinsic tests. So now let's start with the first part, ways to understand how large language models work. We have 2 analogies that could get us more intuition of the testing framework. So the first analogy is the student testing analogy. Imagine there's a student, Cici, who is a new student at our school. How can we know something about Cici? The intuitive answer in the mind of many teachers and also us is that we can design exams. And then the next question, which is answered by this like GPT-4's score on all these like famous exams. However, the next question we want to ask as scientists is, how do we know if Cici overfitted the exam? And a potential answer that we want to propose here is that we can design questions with extensive, tricky variations and detect whether she is inconsistent at some of the questions. This is the first analogy when the testing subject is like a student. Whereas the second analogy is when the testing subject is more like a program. Imagine you have this program.exe on your laptop. And then instead of exams for humans, we design behavioral tests to test the input-output pairs of the code. Moreover, since we have all the source code, although it might be unethical to open a person's mind, it's totally possible, given the source code, that we can do intrinsic tests to inspect a program's internal execution process. Specifically, in the case of large language models, once we can run some open source models on our own device, then it's basically a function like y, like the output as a function of x, the input. And then all the saved weights actually lead to a deterministic function that transforms your, if you set the temperature to 0, that transforms your input to an output. It's a nice fixed, like frozen function if you run it in the inference mode, just that there are a lot of parameters, like billions or hundreds of billions of parameters, so that it will be hard for us to formulate a short, abstract understanding of it. But we do think that both end, behavioral tests and intrinsic tests, are two possible approaches for us to understand large language models better. So now we will have the talk in the two parts. Like first, we will cover this behavioral tests, and then next we will cover intrinsic tests. Moreover, I think I look at the schedule of this workshop, so a lot of the following talks will heavily mention intrinsic tests. So in this talk, we will sort of relatively have like 2/3 will be more focused on behavioral tests to maximize the information gain. So now let's dive into designing behavioral tests for large language models. So this is how my research journey into this direction looks like. So I first started with a lot of intuitive designs to test large language models. And that include our earlier to like 2020 papers, TextFulla, and a lot of robustness testing data sets. And then last year, we actually summarized all the previous explorations to a more crisp theoretical framework where we use causality to show the sort of the overview of most of the behavioral tests. And then later, now we are also moving into promoting the design of more parametric unseen test samples for large language models. So let's dive into the quick motivation where we started in 2020 to look at whether at that time the best model, BERT, is really robust, a strong baseline for natural language attack on text classification and entailment. So at that time, we were looking at the invariance testing problem. As we mentioned before, like once a model is really good at something, we want to check whether it's consistently good at this task. So this consistency problem is often also called invariance. So what we do is that we take certain NLP tasks, let's say the simple task of sentiment classification, and then we ask whether it's positive or negative review. So we see that at that time, a lot of large language models actually perform very well at this task already. And then what we do is that we create a paraphrase for the same input and see that the large language model, like the BERT that time, actually flips its prediction from negative to positive. So we extracted a bunch of text classification tasks and natural language inference tasks. And check, let's say, many of them has like really high performance, 90% more, or even close to totally conquering certain tasks. Also for NLI. And then what we do is that we look at, does high accuracy means that neural networks conquers the two tasks the same way as humans do, like consistently. And then we do discover that after paraphrasing attack, then some of the models will drop from 90 plus to under 10% accuracy in the same task. So this is sort of pretty astounding. And you can access the TextFulla model using the library text attack. So these are all like very astounding evidence. And that sort of like make us to think about a better framework to understand this behavior. So reflecting what we have just seen now, basically we're looking at the cases where models fail at invariance checks. And then usually the very commonly used word in our community is spurious correlation. We say that the models overfit spurious correlations in the training data. However, can we have a more crisp theoretical understanding of what is this spurious correlation, especially using a causal framework? So we draw inspirations from the conditional reflex experiment to get some more intuition for how this framework should be like. So in the conditional reflex experiment, we basically have a dog, a bell, and some food. And then we all know that for humans, we understand the bell doesn't cost more food. However, if the experimenter carefully designed the experiment so that every time they sequentially first ring the bell and then give the food for the dog, then it's very natural that in the dog's understanding, they misunderstood that the bell causes the food. And then that will lead them, this is causal in that will lead the dog later even to generate saliva. And then, however, in the human world, it's actually a spurious correlation between the bell and the food. So reflecting on this example, what we see here is we have human understanding and dog understanding. And then what we observe between the two agents is that spurious correlation for one agent actually becomes a causal relation for the other agent. So this is sort of the key motivation behind our framework. And then later on for this robustness problem, invariance check problem, we formulated using structured causal models where we say that for humans, they have a specific SCM where there could be some spuriously correlated variable. So X is the input, Y is the output. For humans, X decides the output Y, although there will be some spurious correlation that exists between this input-output pair. And then for models, they might misunderstood what's happening with Z and actually put that as a causal variable for its decision Y. So the difference here is the reliance on Z in this entire process. So we have this causal distribution P for the human decision-making, and then the distribution P prime for the model decision-making. So all the robustness problem becomes inspecting the difference, delta, between P and P prime. And then we sort of conduct a neat case study using math reasoning as an example to showcase the effectiveness of this framework. So this is our ACL 2023 paper, a causal framework to quantify the robustness of math reasoning in language models. So so we choose math because it's really neat for us to extract the variables, which are directly the numbers, and also plot every discovery really neatly. Although this framework should be applicable to other tasks as well. So diving into this task, what we look into is number bias in large language models. Imagine that you have some arithmetic problem. It could be as common as 100 plus 100 equals 200. Or it could be still the sum being 200, but you use several less common numbers and add them together. So the reason we come up with this example is similar to the motivation we saw before. Let's say 30 is a common number, but 29 is a less common number. So models tend to fail more when 29 is related to the correct decision. So what we look into as spurious correlation here is that we will have a causal graph for the correct human decision making, such as 100, 100, both as causal variables, and then we conduct the correct arithmetic. Then it leads to the correct answer, 200. Whereas it's totally possible that for model decision making, it learns the spurious correlation between 100 and 200. And then, so not only do some circuits or some mechanisms exist between 100 and 100, they're correct arithmetic to the answer, but also directly from the common word 100 to the correct answer as a spurious correlation. So using this as our intuition, then we dive into the specific framework that we have in this paper. So we look extensively into math word problems. It could be formulated as this example. Mark has N1 trees in his backyard. He plants N2 more. How many trees will he have? And then here we have the causal variable, the first number being 12, the second number being 13, the arithmetic being the addition relation, and the ground truth answer is 25. So what we do here is that we take this well-annotated math word data set and transform it into a causal graph where each component of the data set becomes a causal variable in our graph. So it could be there's a question template, and then independent of that, there's the operand we have, which is 12 and 13. And then the template further decompose into the relation that's expressed, the addition relation that's expressed in the text, and the surface form, maybe whether it's Mark or Mary or Anna, the surface form that's irrelevant for the math operation. And then what we do is that we list out the human causal graph to solve this problem, which starts from the question template, distill the math operation, as well as this, like getting the operands out and run the ground truth, like the correct calculation. Whereas for the models, it could also totally be possible that they have their prediction, like the red part. The prediction actually relies on the text surface form. It relies on maybe addition is much more frequent than division. So it might also have a certain dependency on this like math operation. Moreover, the most interesting phenomenon that we're looking into is the number bias. So let's say whether the number is as clean as 100 or some weird number like 37 and stuff, that might also have an effect on the model prediction. So this is the second step we're doing, like we sort of draw the causal graph. A disclaimer is that there could be different causal graphs for different tasks, and we welcome very domain-specific adaptation when people want to use this framework. So the third step we have is perform do interventions. So how we do this like extensive behavioral check is that we identify all the variables where the interventions could be possible. Especially the most easy intervention here is to change the numbers. And then after that, from all the variables that we can perform do intervention on, we use causal inference to measure all the possible path-specific effects that we want. So we will later introduce more details into what these notations actually mean. So just a high-level feeling is that we can evaluate the size of path, like let's say direct causal effect from a variable to the prediction. We can also evaluate the size of total causal effect, summing all the paths from a variable to the final prediction. So now let's dive into the two types of causal effects that we can derive. So we take a common substructure out of the big graph that we just saw. So we have, so this structure is called like mediation, where you have a treatment and you have an effect. Let's say here we could be like the two number operands as the treatment. And then the mediator could be the ground truth, like in the previous case, 200 or 25. We have this mediator, and then we have the final prediction of the model. So we want to test two types of causal effects here. The first type is the total causal effect from, let's say here, from the number to the prediction. And formulating that into the do calculus notation, it's basically we want to look at the expectation of the output y given that we perform the intervention, like let's say make the numbers to a certain value versus not making that to a certain value. So that's the total effect from the number variable to the outcome. And then we will also contrast it with a control group, like a control value of the number. And note, in this way, let's say the t variable is the number value. The causal effect we get is actually the total of all the paths from t to y, no matter like what intermediate variables it goes through. However, sometimes we also need path-specific causal effects. Taking the same graph, we want to distill the effect from the unwanted effect from directly the numbers to the output versus the correct one from numbers to the correct arithmetic result to the output. Then what we do is the so-called natural direct effect, NDE, where the NDE of a binary treatment T on an outcome Y mediated by X, the mediator X, is given by, so we set the mediator to the value had the treatment been 0. So in our case, we set, let's say, the sum of the two numbers to be fixed to be 25, and we change the numbers to be either 12 plus 13 or 5 plus 20 and so on. So so that's the way we fix this intermediate result, and then we do change the actual value of the operands. So here, a visual understanding of this will be, we have these two paths specific effect from t to the outcome y, and then in order for us to directly evaluate the t to y relation, we fix the value of x, freeze it to the value when t is still 0, and then evaluate the direct change relating to how t corresponds to a change in y. So using this as a framework, we basically develop a 4-step approach to evaluate the robustness problem for model performance. And then for different models, we can evaluate, let's say, the DCE, direct causal effect, or total causal effect of each variable that we're able to perform some intervention on or perform some causal inference on. So using this as a general framework, now we zoom out a little bit. So a recap is we do reformulate the robustness problem using SCM as a framework. And this could lead to many future stress tests for NLP. So the things that we have mentioned is TextFula, which runs on classification NLI. And we also have other papers on aspect-specific sentiment analysis. This paper, mass reasoning. And we will also talk about another paper, causal reasoning, which also fall into this framework. So moving on to the last block of this 3-step process, where we get some intuition from intuitive designs of behavioral tests, and then we make it into a nice causal framework. Now we move on to, what does this causal framework tell us to do? What inspiration can we draw for future dataset design? So we suggest that it would be a very good idea to design parametric test samples. And we will showcase using our NeurIPS 2023 paper on testing causal inference in large language models. So the key spirit here for the 3rd step is that for all the causal components that we have just seen in the graph, we want to make them already intervenable or parametric during the dataset design process, instead of, let's say, had the previous problem not be mass word problem, it will be much more difficult, let's say, if you want to extract an emotion variable or personality variable and so on. It would be much more difficult for users to post hoc extract these variables. So we suggest we do it already in the initial step, designing the data set. And the way how the Collider dataset assessing causal reasoning in large language model work that we do is sort of correspond to this idea. So being very attentive when designing the data set. So this is a joint work with a lot of awesome collaborators across Max Planck Institute, ETH, HKU, IIT, and UW. So the spirit here is that we're testing the causal reasoning skills of large language models, and we actually make the so we draw inspiration from how the famous causality books, these are most of the university textbooks when people try to learn causality. So basically, in order to do causal reasoning correctly, experts actually extract 3 elements from the input and then run it over a causal inference engine to derive at a ground truth answer. And the 3 elements we have is to understand what underlying causal graph there is, get the available data, most of the cases in the form of correlation or marginal distribution and so on. And then we have a query of the exact causal phenomenon that we're asking for. And the way we designed this data set in a very parametric way, just as a case study of how this suggestion should be carried. So we basically have each component in the same color scheme as these abstracted symbols here. So we do describe the causal graph where all the variables, the names can be changed. We also make the numbers easy to change arithmetically as well as we have several question templates for each type of causal query. So putting this all together, we enable a large variation when designing the data set. So the variation could be that the question you ask, so we have, in this case, 8 type of different questions across 3 fundamental types of causal queries: correlational query, interventional query, and counterfactual queries. We also make it changeable for the underlying causal graph behind this question that we're asking. So the causal graph could be confounding, diamond, chain, fork, and so on. Moreover, I think another generally applicable variation that would be good for future data set is that you can look at the level of empirical alignment of your question. So it's basically like, even without looking at the question, can people already answer the smoking cause cancer, even without looking at the data and reason correctly using due calculus and stuff? So that's what we list as like the question itself is already commonsensical. Or it could be like anti-commonsensical, where we create anti-intuitive examples like smoking causes the air shape, or nonsensical ones where you use symbolic variable names to replace them. And then like after the alignment, we also like verbalize the variable names, instantiate the variable names. So for the same, let's say, confounding graph, it could be vaccine vulnerability fertility rate. It could also be drug gender recovery. And you can have these like causal graph, like variable name instantiations for each type of the empirical alignment that you're designing. So this is just a case of like how we could make the data set, the first case, already like very compositional so that it benefits the later tests. So this is the end of the behavioral test branch that we're going to cover, that we covered. And then now we move to the second part of the talk. So intrinsic tests for large language models and what role causality can play in this realm. So we reflect on the general paradigm. So when we are using a large language model, usually what we see here, like fitting the goal of this workshop, we see a black box of the model. And then what we have as the input is some text, and it will also generate some output text. So here, if we look into the behavioral test that we just introduced, the really advanced one where we have lots of variations, a causal framework to understand it. But basically, the main spirit behind is that we change the input text to a rich causal graph of different components, how these components should connect to each other. Then we perform intervention on some of the components we're able to do and evaluate the total causal effect or direct causal effect from each component to the output prediction. And all that framework is still put into the case where we don't know anything about the internal parameter of the model. So which means this could be the case how we test a real student, where we don't want to open the brain of the student. Or it could be the case where we want to test OpenAI models, where we don't have the parameters of. However, another paradigm that we're also interested in is the intrinsic test, given some open source models. So now we open the black box, and let's say most of the models have this transformer architecture. For illustration, we use GPT-2 with 12-layer transformers. So we're able to open this black box of the large language models. And then the role of causality here is in a different sense. So previously, we have already seen that like any change on the input text is causal. A more fine-grained causality that's happening here will be how the change in input text actually affects certain model components. Maybe a certain attention had to take care of a certain operation, and then changing the input actually activates that attention head or the MLP layer or the other things. And then these components sort of act as the mediator to finally affect the output. So leads to a certain output from the model components. Moreover, the intervention is not only on the input side, it could also be internally within the large language model architecture. We have seen lots of work such as causal mediation analysis, causal tracing, or /patching, where they do changes to some internal activations of the LLM and say that when we knock out certain neurons, then what will happen to sort of distill the effect of certain component on the output. So as we see, causality is everywhere, and really excited for how this direction will go. And also, as we just mentioned, this same structure, the same substructure of causal graph actually appears again, not only in the behavioral tests that we cover, but also in the intrinsic tests that now we're talking about. So again, so the variables become slightly different from what we see in the behavioral test. When we do it in the realm of intrinsic tests, the past specific causal effects that we want is as follows. So we have this input which causes a change to the model output, but we also know that the input will change things in the model components, which act as a mediator here. And the mediator could be of any unit. You could say it's a neuron in the network, attention head, or MLP layer, or an entire, maybe multiple layers as a unique unit. And then you want to get the two type of different past specific effects. One is directly change the input. What's the total effect on the output? The other is from the input through the mediator, how much, let's say, how much does a certain neuron capture gender bias or stuff. And then the difference between these, let's say, what we can get is only, let's say, maybe the red pass or the total pass. Then we will sort of get a feeling of the blue pass as the subtraction of the total effect minus some past specific effect that we're able to directly derive. So now let's look into, this is our ongoing work. We should be able to wrap up the paper soon. Not yet on archive, but we'll be there. So this work that we look into is interpreting the competition of mechanisms in large language models. So we draw the motivation from the inverse scaling price. A quick summary for that scaling price is that it aims to get an important task where large language models, the larger the model is, the worse they perform. So let's say many of the tasks do look like fit the scaling law, like latest models, newer and bigger ones perform on the task better. However, they wonder, like, that competition is to welcome proposals of tasks that actually decrease with the model size. So one of the tasks that we look into, which inspires this work, is the redefinition task, where an example input could be redefine pi as 500. What is the first digit of pi? So drawing inspiration from that, we also take some examples from the Rome dataset, which can scale this up more. An example case that we show in this slide is, let's say, if we redefine the word code blue. So in our, let's say, the context given to the large language model is that in our emergency code, code blue actually means there's a technical fault instead of a medical emergency, which it usually means. Now we want to ask, what does code blue mean? And then the assistant ChatGPT in this case answers that in a medical context, code blue typically refers to a medical emergency, specifically a cardiac arrest. It is a code used to alert healthcare providers that immediate resuscitation is required. So what we see here is that no matter, although we have redefined the task in our specific environment, the model still refers to what it saw in the training data. So distilling this phenomenon further, what we see is actually a competition of two types of mechanisms. Mechanism one being memorization from training data, where code blue means medical emergency. And mechanism two means a redefinition given this specific context, similar to the pi example we saw. And then the problem we see here is that in the above case, the large language model fails to understand which mechanism it should let win. So that's the core spirit behind this redefinition task to win at the inverse scaling price. And we think it's a really meaningful phenomenon to extract out. So how can a large language model correctly distinguish when there are two mechanisms that could make sense, which one really fits this specific task requirement better? So we also see this competition of mechanisms at the core of many other use cases. So this redefinition, as we mentioned, people could also have a competing redefinition. Maybe at first they redefine Java as define Java as a tourist destination, and then they might maybe have a change of mood or change of context, ignore the previous one, and Java should be a programming language. Now, please answer, what is Java? There could also be knowledge updates, such as maybe from the previous training data, the US president was Trump, but then now the US president should be Biden. So this updated knowledge is also a competing mechanism for the model to understand that an earlier moment when it saw the present tense of US president being a certain name, later on they should appropriately overwrite. Or maybe some scientific discovery, let's say if large language model was trained several centuries ago where phlogiston was believed to be the component of fire, we do want it to override that knowledge and have a more correct, scientifically updated definition or understanding of fire. So this is where we see the importance of competition of mechanisms. And then specifically to look into this phenomenon, we actually identified the two different circuits. So this is an example adapted from the Rome dataset, where, so David Bell's Rome dataset. The specific example is redefine iPhone is produced by IBM. And then now please answer, what is iPhone produced by? So here we actually locate the two mechanisms. One is the knowledge recall from the training data, colored in blue, and the other is the induction circuit, which helps the models to copy the word IBM in the previous context. And so there's an induction circuit carrying the word IBM, and then this becomes this redefinition token, which actually becomes having a strong logit and probability in the later attention layers. So this is the circuit in the red color. And then the other circuit, which is a knowledge recall, this has also been found by many other studies on mechanistic interpretability, where also specifically in our case, we see that the word is, iPhone, and by together contribute to the knowledge recall of the word apple. And then this word apple was first recalled like near the first layer, like layer 0, attention and MLP. Then it's carried over by the word iPhone through later process. And then this memorized token is actually prevalent. It starts to have a very strong weight in attention layer 9, 10, 11. That's the GPT-2 study that we have. And then they together, the model sort of compared the two tokens and finally predict a final logic to see which token should win. Diving more into what's happening in each layer, we also apply logic lens, where we project the embedding after the last word by. So as we all understand, so in the last layer, the last word by induces an embedding that help us to predict the next word IBM. And then we sort of take this final embedding transformation and look into what is happening at this position across the previous layers. So what we see here is that although the last layer make IBM win over Apple, so this is normalized across all the vocabulary, maybe around 50K. So like the winning candidates, 2% is actually a clear margin over the others. So let's say in the last layer, it's clear that IBM ranked as the first probable token. This is also the case in the last 3 layers together. However, if we look into the beginning ones, actually, let's say layer 1 to layer 6, we all see like Apple and IBM, so the 2 candidates have pretty low probability, and it's sort of like after many other words that ranked above them. The other phenomenon we see is that actually Apple, like sort of we use that to simplify the average we got over a sample of words that mean memorization token. So the memorization token actually wins over the induction token, redefinition token or induction token, we say in this case, across all the first several layers until layer 6. And then we start to see some like winning over that make IBM above the probability of Apple. Again, this is still ongoing work. We will scale up this experiment to make it more significant. So this is what happened like when we look into the residual stream at each layer. We also look into how each component of the model, which include a lot of attention heads per layer, 12 attention heads per layer, plus 1 MLP layer, and then times 12 layers in total. So what we plot here is the probability of the recalled token, this word Apple, versus the probability of the redefinition token, the word IBM. And then we use the radius of the circle to represent the, it's proportional to the probability of that token given by the component that we're looking into. So similar to the observation we have in the previous residual stream across layers, in the first several layers, both have really little probability and they're on par. And then later on, we see that like certain heads actually like magnifies the probability of let's say recall token, and certain heads magnifies the probability of redefinition token. And then everything sort of like reaches its peak in the last several layers, which affects the probability more. So apart from this like sort of dissection into what's happening across different components, we also vary the input in a sort of microscopic sense. So we changed 2 components here. First is for this redefinition token. So we started from the correct token Apple, and then the redefinition token can have a high cosine similarity with Apple, or it can be relatively orthogonal with Apple. So we have like we designed 4 layers of similarities, where the most similar, as an example, to give us more intuition, the most similar one is snapshot, and it could be like MSN, face, or environment is among the least similar ones. So some phenomenon we observe here is that there are 2 phenomena. One is the larger the model, the stronger the memorization circuit. The other is like the less similar this redefinition token, the less strong the memorization circuit. And then we can show it sort of by, so in this plot, how long each bar is basically when mechanism 1, the memorization mechanism wins. And then we can see that the inverse scaling law does hold that. So mechanism 1 winning is a wrong mechanism that we don't expect, we don't want to have. And then the larger models does show a stronger phenomenon like that. So with this, we'll wrap up the intrinsic test branch of the talk. And also in our ETH lab, we have several other mechanistic interpretability papers that you can feel free to check out at the main conference, towards a mechanistic interpretation of multi-step reasoning capability of large language models, where they cover a richer set of reasoning tasks that compose of many steps. There is also a mechanistic interpretation of arithmetic reasoning in large language models using the same causal mediation analysis that we introduced in this talk. So with this, I also thank all my collaborators, and thank you for listening.
All right, we have room for questions.
Hello, thank you so much for the talk. So my question is, how do you think redefinition can affect safety of the models? So for example, if I want to ask something that might be harmful, is it okay to bypass this kind of memorization?
So, can you describe it more clearly? Like which?
For example, if I want to say that it's okay for me to tell me how I can, create a bomb or something, and I redefine it as something that is okay to be done. How this can affect do we want this kind of behavior? Do we want this kind of win between memorization and redefinition to be more biased towards a redefinition, or we want to stick to this kind of memorization?
That's a great question. For the specific example you mentioned, definitely we don't want user to override something that system designed. I totally agree. In that case, there should be some system blocker to make certain actions, including this how to make a bomb, or including some user secrets that should not be mentioned again as a passcode. Yes, so probably it means that for the same structure where there's competition of mechanism, when ethics come into play, then in each context, we should have a higher regulation of which mechanism should win over. Yeah, great question.
Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you for this great talk. My question is, you especially mentioned that it is very important to have an intervenable kind of task designed in the behavioral tasks. And I'm wondering, do you have any suggestions on tasks that are can hardly be described as intervenable? For example, in real life scenarios, when a patient gets ill and he or she takes drugs, and he or she recovered by taking the drug, but it is very hard to say, for example, if he doesn't take the drug, whether he or she will be recovered or not. Do you have any suggestions on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that enters into the domain of counterfactual prediction, where traditional causal inference people or domain experts work on that. So it feels to be a challenge in the data creation side. The synthetic data is not similar as math, where we run a program as computer scientists we can do, but it should be more a domain specific. So I usually see these studies at the intersection of medical expert together with causal inference people, to create counterfactual prediction of the same patient without taking drug, what would happen. That could fall into the case of either counterfactual prediction or intervention. That's the traditional, sort of the causal inference question.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much for the talk. I'm wondering about the two components of your talk and whether there might be a domain where you could use one as a kind of sanity check on the other. And the case I have in mind in particular was the discussion of arithmetic inference, where you were considering the question of, okay, to what degree is the model doing addition? To what degree is the model just kind of looking at the inputs and producing some nice round numbers and output? Have you found, and so you can sort of infer from your causal inference a kind of strength of causality of those two different processes. So now can we go inside the same model and look at the mechanisms and determine the strength of their import for this task? And I wonder if you do that, and when you do that, do the results align with one another, or do you get any surprising divergences?
Good question. So I love this. Sounds like an awesome future work direction. So the first half of the question, it's nice to connect the two. And as we mentioned, the first thing is about changing everything on the input side. The second thing is about like actually get the path specific facts through each component. So when the second half of your question is, will the results contradict each other? So I think
I said confirm. I didn't
confirm each other. Okay, wonderful. So I think theoretically they should add up to be the same because all the past specific fact go through, it's similar to energy preservation, like going through each component, but in the end, they should all turn into the effect from the input to the output. Yeah, great insights. Thank you so much.
Hello, thanks for the presentation. So as you mentioned earlier, so we first define as much variable as possible, then do the draw the causal graph, then do the intervention. So however, in most of the case, it's intractable to list all of the variables. So even with the domain expert. So in such case, what we can do for the causal graph or intervention?
So that's a great question. One example that pops into my mind could be like we have a complicated text. There could be many variables, but usually by policies, we care about certain things like gender or race. So in that case, it's also fine to, let's say, we leave all the rest into one unit and then just take out important variables. We look into the effect of gender, we look into the effect of race. So that could be a case if a certain task is super complicated. I think it might need some more work thinking what might be the best framework to solve it. Because like this whole causal inferencing, it was proposed when there's still a simplistic model that could model it. It's similar to in physics. We have reductionism, which want to make the complicated physics phenomenon by certain, like a good, nice set of laws. But then if something becomes too complicated, we rely on control theory or have a separate study of complex system. Yeah, so probably it could be like two type of tasks.
Yeah, thanks. And if I may, second question. So most of the work you mentioned earlier involve a predefined causal graph. So have you ever considered to design let's say, end-to-end framework, first do the causal discovery, then do the causal estimation?
That's a great question. Traditionally, if the variables are more structured, this is totally good, like first causal discovery, then inference. I wonder if the challenge for text will be if, let's say, we have a student essay as input, then what variable should we establish at the first place? That could be a challenge. Although if we predefine the variables that we want, it could be possible that some causal discovery thing, like using PC algorithm or stuff, that could play a role here.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep.
I'll go to the other side.
Yeah, just some additional note. I think the causal discovery part could worth its own paper, like more, let's say, computation, social science, or humanities might want to understand, oh, the causal graph behind a lot of text. Yeah.
So I was under the impression that the redefinition task was not inverse scaling wall, but it was U-shaped, meaning that like it performance degrades up to like a certain model size and then it starts improving again. I was curious if you guys saw any evidence for that from like a mechanistic interpretability lens rather than like just looking at the scaling laws from like a high level point of view.
Good question. We so far haven't run it on super large models yet. Yeah, I suspect maybe Anthropic people and OpenAI people can run it. Yeah, good suggestion. I also have this suspicion, like in that like GPT-4 or more capable ones should have a more human-like understanding.
There was the paper from Anthropic. I don't remember which one it was, but that was like, oh, all the inverse scaling law submissions are like actually U-based, U-shaped, and not inverse scaling law. Like, there hasn't actually been an inverse scaling law task found yet.
Okay, nice. So that would be a good discovery to add into the view of looking at this. Although I think the extracting the two circuits and look at where the computation happens, that could still be orthogonal and an interesting, investigation on its own. Yeah, thanks for the question.
All right, final question.
Hi. Just regarding the redefinition task, so I'm a psycholinguist. Humans will also have the activation of the actual pi number and apple, right? And there will be, so we have the frontal cortex, which has specialized in inhibiting things that may be unconsciously popping up that we don't want to actually utter. Do you have any, because I mean, the model only has, attention heads. It doesn't have a specialized system for inhibition. Do you have any idea how it's achieving inhibition without any sort of separate module like we have with the inhibitory or the frontal cortex?
Can you perhaps explain the human side better?
So we have a specialized module that performs inhibition. So for example, if you are bilingual, you speak two languages, when you're like, I'm currently speaking English, my native language is French. So I'm inhibiting my French. So my frontal cortex is inhibiting the sort of more natural language for me in order for me to utter the correct words, just like the redefinition task. So we have a specialized system, but the model doesn't, and yet it's able to inhibit in the later layers the incorrect or the previous memorized answer. Did you have any insights about how it's achieving that without a specialized module?
Good question. I think probably similar to what we show in the circuit here. Like at least maybe humans do work differently mechanistically than the models, because like, let's say the redefinition, especially when it's a copy operation, it's actually a very easy ability for the model to pick up. So and also like a lot of the knowledge recall is in the MLP, which I intuitively understand as a bigram type of mapping. Let's say from the keyword iPhone, I can remember Apple the most. So I feel like that might correspond to like human memorization, but maybe the specific inhibition behavior you mentioned could be like more fine-grained and then specific to human. But worth discussion.
There's also, I think these models have a recency bias, right?
Yeah.
So when you're prompting them, they pay attention to the last bits of the prompt more than and this is probably, maybe this is helping it pick up the IBM, the new token instead of the old token.
It could be possible, especially if you mention multiple random things, and then it could be likely that the recent one has a higher effect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for the great questions.